everyone. This week on Around the Coin podcast is episode 48. And as always, just a reminder, include any comments or questions or requests you have in the comment section on aroundthecoin.quora.com or aroundthecoin.com. And we're very easy to get a hold of, Brian Feisel and I. So we talked about a hodgepodge of episodes or topics within this episode, I should say. Apple Watch, we started out. Brian gave us a brilliant 10, 15 minute discussion around Apple Watch, some of the things that they built in. Of course, some of the things in Apple patents that not many people have realized, which is very interesting. Secondly, we discussed the sort of venture capitalist trends for 2015, particularly around payments, around the demise or the shortage of Bitcoin investments predicted to be made in 2015. We sort of transitioned that into the perceptions of reality for what is hot, what are the popular startups that will get funded based on sort of the macroeconomic trends around social commerce. We jumped into Bitcoin a bit and talked about the uphill battle that Bitcoin startups are now facing based on the downturn of the Bitcoin valuation or price of Bitcoin. Brian discussed a bit about cryptocurrency and mining. Brian has extensive background in cryptocurrency, and he discussed one company, it was a cryptocurrency, I believe it's URO, that is essentially a commodity for Indian manure. But it kind of just opened your eyes to see about all the different types of cryptocurrencies that are out there. An interesting aside at that point in the conversation. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes, we dove into immigration reform, particularly into the U.S. And both Feisel, myself, and Brian had some pretty bold thoughts on where immigration reform is going and some of the major obvious problems with it. So a lot of passionate conversations toward the end of the conversation. Included a bunch of show notes and hope you enjoy. And as a reminder, just reach out if you have any special requests for topics. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to another episode of Around the Coin with Brian, Feisel, and Mike here. We are excited for today. We spent a good bit of time before the show brainstorming different topics. The past few weeks, due to the holidays, have been a bit slow, so we circled back at all the most interesting topics that we could get our hands on and crafted up some good perspectives. So I'm excited for today's episode. Brian Feisel, doing great as always, I assume?
Doing wonderful.
Happy New Year,
Excited
2015 to you.
Yep, this is our first official 2015 post. So it's going to be interesting how this year shapes out. A few of the different topics we have today. We'll start with the Apple Watch. Brian, I know, particularly is interested, and we all are, to see it actually released. But a few of the ideas you were giving us before the show, Brian, were interesting around what the Apple Watch could bring, especially for the non-obvious user, maybe in payments, and what we're looking at when it is expected to release when. And did they say late February, March timeframe?
You know, they're not being exactly specific. It's mostly, at this point, first quarter of 2015. And there's a lot of good reason for that. I mean, they are working like I've never, I have a lot of people work inside of Apple or friends, and I've never seen such an all hands on deck working on making this product become just an incredibly polished experience. What we saw announced is, I think, ultimately look back and saying we only saw 20% of that product. Apple wisely held back some of the most amazing features of this device. I can't really dump into every aspect of it, but I think one of the unannounced features is going to be a system that is very much like IFTTT. And for those that are not familiar with IFTTT, it's an app that essentially allows you to do logical, if this happens, then do this type of scenarios. Now, one would ask, why would Apple go down that road? And again, be really mindful of anything I say about Apple. Apple has, in the past, changed direction. I'll use the sapphire screened iPhone as a great example. The iPhone 6 series was supposed to be sapphire. In fact, my view was it was going to be a sapphire black. primarily with a backing of liquid metal. That did not happen because the Sapphire situation with GT Technologies failed in a spectacular way. So what I'm saying about Apple Watch is always subject to revision, and it's likely that if it doesn't show in this version, it will show in a future version. But what is this IFTTT scenario going to be like? Well, Apple is going to make it a cloud-based system. It'll allow you to look at different sort of triggers, and not the normal triggers that you would normally find in these types of systems. Apple's going to reach out in use cases that have heretofore not been around. And there'll be ways for iCloud and existing apps to communicate with this sort of logical decisioning network. And it is primarily an Apple Watch type of things. It is primarily something that's going to be using the haptic, which is a vibrational response system that's built inside of, or taptic. They have their own proprietary name to it, which essentially creates different vibrational responses based upon a particular notification or event. If this system is presented the way I have imagined, if you will, you will be able to take events that are normally not efficiently notifiable and make it into a watch-based notification. Now, you might ask, well, what kind of things can you do? Well, you can certainly identify specific actions on social network, for example, not just if somebody has posted something, but contextually what that post is about, perhaps where they're located when that post takes place. Now imagine if Apple created a system that went out to the greater world using legal API type of access and creates a logical way for you to derive from all these social signals that somebody is within 6 blocks of you. And again, this is a public signal. It's not using Apple's Find My Friends technology or anything like that, although in the future it could. So that's one of the hidden features I see Apple Watch presenting, and I believe it's going to be quite addictive. Another aspect is going to be payments, and I think the Apple Pay experience, although extremely pleasurable and phenomenally brilliant for most people on the iPhone, is going to be a magnitude better on Watch. On Apple Watch, you're going to see people more instinctively performing transactions. And as iBeacons start entering into the scenario, there'll be a much more richer feedback mechanism that I think Apple Watch will be uniquely positioned to take advantage of. And that leads me into the second sort of feature that is announced but not very clear in people's mind, is that Apple Watch is going to live in a world where iBeacons are going to become much more common. Apple presented to the Federal Communications Commission a permit to create an iBeacon, which is about the size of a nickel in final size. This iBeacon is perhaps going to be using the energy harvesting systems that a company they acquired called Passive created. And this has an Apple logo on it. It's Apple branded. And it came back out recently, just this past week, that the details of how the system is going to work was published at the FCC's website. A little hard to get to, but when you start reading it, some observers are speculating that this is just for developers. Apple is not making any particular piece of hardware just for a specific small segment. Even when they made Apple TV, for example, they called it a hobby, but it was designed for a wide sector. These iBeacons are not only going to be deployed by commercial businesses, we're going to do it ourselves within certain aspects of our home, and they're going to communicate perhaps with Apple TV and our iOS devices. And they're going to be doing things that only iWatch or Apple Watch, wish it was iWatch, it makes life so much easier.
I know, it would. I wonder why they don't call it that.
They needed to eliminate the I designation because they were running up to a drought of usable word combinations. Like internally, Apple Pay was originally part of iWallet. And they were working on the potential of acquiring the iWallet trademark rights. It's currently owned by an individual in San Diego. But I think Tim Cook made a last-minute decision and said we're going to have to abandon the I designation.
The I. It's funny, Brookstone. I used to work for Brookstone, and they use the I as well. So the I track and a lot of the other.
On a lot of stuff. What is it?
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, even luggage. So
yeah. So Brian, what is Passive exactly? What sort of company did they have? Do you know before they were acquired? They developed the low energy chip, sort of the chip manufacturer, right? So did Apple acquire them for the engineers, for the actual technology? It seems like this is something that Apple, I'm surprised they wouldn't build themselves.
Oh, it's because it was incredibly well thought out and well engineered. And it was an acquisition of not only the talent, but some of the patents that they're holding on the way they're harvesting radio frequency. This is very much like what Nikola Tesla was trying to do with the tower that he built. And this idea that you could send essentially radio frequency around the world, and you can use devices which are essentially a form of inductance and capacitors to harvest that energy. Well, it's funny. People have tried to do this, but we're finally in a place where almost everybody's home, for better or for worse, is surrounded with radio frequency, Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth even, radio broadcast, TV broadcast, satellite, communication signals. It doesn't take a great deal of that, which just runs past us and through us sometimes, and microwave energy. It doesn't take very much to take some of that and harvest it. You don't see a signal depletion around you because that's not how radio frequency works. To harvest this energy and store it into what are essentially temporary batteries and to power extremely low current type of systems. And the systems that Passive created started with essentially Bluetooth low energy and what are now known as iBeacons or beacons. But they have really marshaled the technology to go and almost cover the entire Bluetooth protocol within a system that requires no recharging, meaning you could tape this thing or attach it somewhere and leave it and never have to touch it again. This type of scenario is extremely important if you really want to nano and micro locate within a particular location, but even more importantly, just to be able to set it and forget it and not have to worry about coming back. And even if a battery lasts 2 or 3 years, if what Apple, I believe, is building is going to take hold, we're talking about decades. You'll put this stuff up and never worry about it again. So we have that technology came from Passive. It's been growing, and they actually started creating prototypes, and it was right around the time a prototype was created that Apple acquired the company. So that's going to be a part of an Apple Watch.
Is the idea to just throw these things around everywhere, or is it to sell them to merchants so they can put them in their store? Would merchants own the data, or would Apple own the data, or to just be like a kind of a real estate like device where it just sits there and no one owns it in particular, just used to almost like cell phone towers where they're just used to relay information?
This is the exciting part about what beacon technology represents. It is the Wild West. It is going to be established quite clearly as a mechanical system, as it is already established as a protocol stack known as iBeacons within the Apple protocol. We're going to be seeing ways that merchants will use this that are going to be profoundly important. And we're going to be seeing ways for consumers to use this that are going to be just as important within their own house. And on transportation, it's got a lot of aspects. I identified over 377 at this point primary use cases of what beacon technology can create. And Apple Watch is going to be one of those devices that will just fit in between the spaces between what an iPhone is doing and other devices, let's say a computer is currently performing. And I see that as one of the hidden technologies. I'll add one more final thing to this. During the holidays, I spend a lot of time with relatives. A lot of them ages from 7 to 18. And I, as I always do, whenever I'm around almost anybody, I like to look at the first two screens of their device. And
says a lot about a person, right?
Well, it does. And first off, Facebook has got a generational problem. A lot of younger people see it as their mom's social network. Every single kid I talk to, with probably about 35, 40 different kids, it's my mom's on there. It's my mom's social network. I don't do anything. Snapchat, yeah, they use it. But what are they really using in school? This will blow your mind. Something that nobody really even considers, and it's never talked about in a tech press as a big thing. 100% of all the kids I talk to is using AirDrop in their schools. This is their local network way of doing picture sharing. It's a way of doing, they don't necessarily want ephemeral type of reactions in say some of these school settings. It turns out that iPhones are to the 90 percentile and again, this is a bit skewed because we're dealing with kids that are around tech centers who have relatively tech savvy parents. Not all of them are extremely tech savvy. They have, doctors, dentists, lawyers, all different types of professions, but their kids are adapting iOS devices to the highest degree, and they've discovered AirDrop. So I asked them, what does a typical AirDrop experience look like? Well, they open up AirDrop and they see 60 names or 60 IDs or 60 different places to drop. And all day long, they're dropping things back and forth. All day long. And nobody knows this is old exploding. For this? You're not in a social situations where AirDrop makes that sense.
So what are we dropping in pictures to this?
Pictures, texts, whatever you can send via AirDrop, they're doing it. And the reason why is you don't need to know the person's address.
Is this mobile to mobile, or do you need...
Of course, yeah. So AirDrop is using Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And it is also creating somewhat of a mesh network.
But it's very convenient,
because...
I use it a lot because between in my wife's laptop and my kid's laptop, can we get the movie? Can we see the pictures? AirDrop it rather than emailing or any, just very simple, AirDrop it.
Now understanding this particular scenario, and this is in college too, by the way. It starts in high school. In middle school, it's a little bit, but the sweet spot is junior, senior high school, freshman to senior in college. So what happens is, there is no prior permission necessary. If you make your AirDrop available for anybody to see, I can send you an AirDrop item, and you, in real time, make a decision whether to accept it or to ignore me forever. And essentially, it's a sort of way to introduce yourself. It's a way to communicate with people who you may not have had an active social connection to. So you don't have to go out to Twitter, you don't have to go to Facebook, you don't have to go to Snapchat and find somebody's who they are and become friends. It is right there, hyper local, nano local. And I've detected here what I think is a premise that I'm certain Apple didn't predict, but I know Apple knows this is going on because they know usage data. And so I had a conversation with one of my friends at Apple, and I said, why are you not talking about the explosion of AirDrop amongst the high school demographic? And he got really quiet. And he said, did you read about that anywhere? I said, no. And he said, explosion is not even the word for it. He said, it is, in fact, a phenomenon that they're trying to really get a handle on. So how does this play into Watch? So I'll close it up with how this interacts with Watch. We're going to be seeing very interesting ways that Apple Watch is going to be using the AirDrop technology to create an on-demand local network which allows you to interact with people who you may not have had prior relationships with, but are local within the range of the radio frequencies of these devices. And to downplay how important that is, I think, is to not understand that it's this demographic that made Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and everything we're talking about as technologies grow. How that scales, that's really up to Apple. Am I saying Apple is in social networks? Well, yes, they are. They have created a de facto social network, which, in my view, is rivaling the use cases of probably Snapchat to a certain demographic. So,
not to mention a very reliable grid mesh network as well.
it is phenomenal. I mean, since Mavericks and iOS 8, I live for AirDrop, but I never thought about the adaptation.
It's so simple. Just right click, share, AirDrop.
So guess what? I'll give you guys a little final one here. Just for kicks, I was at a eating establishment which had a high degree of number of younger people. I opened up cheese. Not that young, man. They keep me out of there. My kids. No, I can't eat that pizza. I can't eat that pizza. Anyway, I opened up my AirDrop app and showed it to my son, and they're not doing it at his school yet. He's not in that grade. He's not in middle school yet. And we were scrolling. It took almost half a minute to scroll through all the active AirDrops that are around us. It was enormous. So I just randomly took a picture of my hamburger there, veggie burger, sent it off to some random name, and essentially started a picture communication with a random individual. And could have easily have asked, go to iMessage or something like that. But there you go. I mean, again, a lot of people are using their real name in AirDrop. So you kind of get some feel for it. Some people, the younger people who know AirDrop is being used as a social network, will put their name, their age, and maybe where they're originally from, the town that they're from. So they put parentheses or dashes. So the AirDrop name becomes kind of long.
This kind of reminds me of Color. You know the app Color that had their major spike around sharing pictures locally? Mm-hmm. But that collapsed for a number of different reasons, which probably won't be the same reasons that Apple collapsed for. So
exactly. Didn't Apple acquire some of the Color technology?
Yeah.
Switching gears, gentlemen. VCs, what are they looking for in 2015?
We'll hit Mike with that. Mike's very close to VCs.
Yeah. I don't know, Brian, I would say, you and I were both talking before the show. But I think it's more like the observation that we were discussing around the sort of trends around specific sectors to invest in. I noticed a pretty strong one probably about 18 months ago to 2 years ago, investing in coupon-based loyalty companies. It's just it's the flavor of the week. It's what's hot. And you can kind of see it based on, media outlets will publicize it. You could see it on AngelList, whatever people are generally investing in. And I think towards the mid to late 2014, the Bitcoin startup, funding environment was quite hot, right? Especially as Bitcoin valuation was going up and up and up. There was more and more meetups. There was more and more VCs getting into it, more startups, more funding announcements. So we've recently seen a downtick in the Bitcoin price, which may or may not strongly or directly influence the funding that goes into it. I think more importantly, it contributes to the overall perspective of the currency's success or failure. There's no reason to fund a company in which the currency essentially is drying up. So we've seen a downtick in Bitcoin, and who knows where it's going to go from here. No one can say for sure. But if it doesn't go up, I don't think the number of Bitcoin investments will continue at their current rate, which then leads to the question, what's next? And I think I believe social commerce sort of building into the experience, especially on mobile, to monetize social platforms, probably the 10 or 15 that come to mind as soon as you think of the word social platform, especially monetizing the user to user, I think is going to be the 2015 focus. And now that probably doesn't emphasize what VCs are going to be funding. Maybe there's going to be particular apps that come out that allow you to do this more efficiently, but I think we'll start to see, especially for the bigger platforms, this development focus on making it easier for people to exchange money, pay for goods and services on these platforms, among many other topics, of course. Faisal, what do you think? You agree?
I do. I just, on the Bitcoin side, I would say this thing, that I think it's going to be a pretty tough time, 2015, for companies. I wouldn't say that the price is the factor. I think volatility is the issue. Volatility sort of, in some very crude ways, denotes lack of transaction volume. And I think that's a big concern. The pricing on an average transaction is so low, I don't know how people are going to make money until and unless we have at least multiplying and coming into the transaction volume, I think we'll see a lot of companies go bust. I think that's the sad reality of it.
Yeah, it appears there's just not many startups making money on the exchange of Bitcoin. Maybe due to the fact that there's an expected business model of $1 million processing for free. We just haven't crossed that threshold, but it does feel like there either is going to be companies collapsing or consolidating to make the business model more effective.
I think the funding that these companies have is going to run out pretty fast. The burn rate is pretty high, and some companies that I know, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, even $500,000 a month. And then if you're not gathering, I don't know, 50,000, 100,000 clients, funding for the next or second or third rounds is going to be very difficult, and you'll eventually have to close shop.
So you're predicting a meltdown in the startup community, or do you think this is going to?
I'll say it's you're shaving off the weaker links, so to speak. I think it's fair to say that you will be, how do you say it? Consolidation, if you will. Maybe that's the right word. You'll be consolidating the market.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a particular type of business model that's in trouble right now that if you heard this, you'd probably change or pivot? Is there hope for guys that have a business model based on Bitcoin exchange taking a fee on that transaction?
Well, the fees are very low. They're extremely low. 0.5%, 0.25%, 0.1%, and in some cases even 0.05% on $100,000. That's $50. What are you going to do with $50? So I'm going to pay the bills. So unless the transaction volume really, really climbs, and I don't see that happening very soon, I think Bitcoin companies are going to be facing a very tough time. Very tough time.
What about consumer adoption? Do you think that as consumer adoption starts rising, that would change this scenario, or do you think it's going to happen one way or the other?
I think consumer adoption is the big thing, because if you look at the Bitcoin bull, the Bit Bowl that happened in St. Petersburg in Florida, there was a lot of hoo-ha that, great, Bitcoin has come to town, et cetera, et cetera. But CoinDesk recently did a survey on all the people who exhibited there, and the performance was dismal. Very, very few Bitcoins were sold, very few transactions were done. A lot of interest, but not many takers. So I think until that changes on the grassroots level, on the consumer level, I think some companies are going to face a pretty uphill battle in getting more consumers coming on board, more transactions taking place, and that's where I think most of the 2015 would be spent on.
Why, Faisal, why do you think there is this lull, right? Why isn't Bitcoin exploding? Why aren't people, I was just on, the grid.com, we were talking about it before the show, and they make payment in twofold. You can either pay with a credit card or pay in Bitcoin, and it's prevalent right on the site. It's easy to do. All I have to do is put in my name and my email. I mean, it feels like all the friction points are down, yet the transaction volume is not exploding.
How do I buy a Bitcoin? If it's ACH on 25 cents, I have to wait 3 days for it before I fund an account and then do it. If I have to buy Bitcoins using a credit card, then what's the use? I'm still paying the money to the vendor, to the merchant, purchasing Bitcoins at a slightly higher price. The differential is taken care of over there. And then I take those Bitcoins and try to do a transaction where I'm only charged, let's say, 0.5%. Really doesn't make a sense. It's in the law, in the country of many, which is the US, many options, that is, does it make sense for anyone to hold Bitcoins and transact with them? I mean, as much as I would hate to say it, it really doesn't.
Is it just not a big advantage over the U.S. dollar and current infrastructure? Is that generally
Not yet, clearly. Not yet, clearly. It's not there yet. I mean, how many payments have you done in Bitcoin, Brian? Let me ask you.
In Bitcoin?
Yeah.
In the last year, about 100. Maybe 80.
And you're probably the early adopter.
Well, he's a miner. Remember that he's a miner. He's an adopter. He's an evangelist. Okay. How about you?
Yeah.
Mike?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Probably a quarter of that, 25 to 40.
And when paying, does Bitcoin come into your mindset that, hey, I can pay via Bitcoin?
It's never a need. But do you think that's a U.S. based problem? And U.S. is only a 300 million out of our total world population, and say out of those that have access to a computer and can actually pay for things online. What about everyone in Italy and everyone in all different financial environments that are more turbulent and actually have a bigger need for it? Wouldn't those people be sucking it up left and right?
I think clearly over there, Bitcoin should take off and probably will take off. Bitcoin has a lot of advantage when it comes to cross-border trade, payments across borders, and so forth. But I think the killer variable here is regulation that is stopping it. If companies want to use it for cross-border payments, the question is, are you regulated to use it? Is it legal to use it? It may be legal on the receiving side. It may not be legal on the sending side, aka the U.S. So that's a big question, And barring, until that equation is not resolved and solved, I don't think so. You'll see a massive uptake on Bitcoin. I think the Bitcoin license, once it comes out from New York and then California eventually, I think that'll get some traction going. But that's still a question mark. It's a huge question mark. How long will it take? How many companies will apply? How many will get it? And so forth. But the regulation, I think, is a huge hurdle.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like, is there another way around the regulation? Is regulation truly the hindrance to Bitcoin's growth? What would the opposers say to that, those implementing these regulations? Would they say these are necessary constraints to the system so people don't get taken advantage of?
I think Ben Lowski has a very good way of putting it. He says, if you're a financial intermediary, simple as that. If you're a financial intermediary and you're taking a very small amount to enable that transaction, could be what he calls it, quote unquote, de minimis. Doesn't matter. You need to be regulated. The law says you need to be regulated. If you're an intermediary for a financial transaction, you need to be regulated. Most of the companies in the Bitcoin space would probably be classified under that specific statement. So because of that, a lot of the companies are, technically speaking, operating in the gray area, in the black even. They're not white. They're not kosher.
Mm-hmm. Thus, let's throw some constraints on them. Interesting. Brian, what do you think? Do you see the same effect in the mining community? Are guys still just as enthusiastic about Bitcoin, or has it kind of dried up? Or is it a lull upon a much bigger trend?
There's three generations of miners, really, when you look at it. They're the really early miners who really weren't miners in the traditional sense. They were just running the daemon, the Bitcoin app in the background, essentially, to help build the block. And for utilizing their energy and computer power, they were getting Bitcoins at that point. And this is very early on in the history. When Bitcoin started being traded in excess of, say, $30, another generation of miners came along, and they started finding ways to create well, at first, we were using display cards, graphics processors to do a lot of the Bitcoin heavy lifting. That quickly went after to field programmable arrays, and then very quickly into application-specific ICs. In that $30 to $500 range, those miners did exceedingly well. The very early miners did very, very well, by the way, if they held their Bitcoin. A lot of them didn't, to be frank about it. But the ones in that period did hold a lot of Bitcoin and did exceedingly well. The difficulty in mining and the return on investment was absolutely incredible. If you kept in front of the difficulty changes, you were doing extremely well. And those people are very positive still. Some of those old timers, let's call that a group of no more than 10,000 people, of which maybe 5,000 are highly active. Those people are still evangelical towards Bitcoin. The later generation and up to now are the ones that came on after Bitcoin reached $500 and beyond and down past 300. Those people are not as motivated. They took heavy losses, potentially, larger losses than any of them are really willing to really deal with. They also came aboard when regulations started to really become much more of an issue.
Brian, I'm curious, who are these miners? Like, what is the demographic of people? Is it actually older folks? Is it predominantly, I'm picturing the, 55-year-old man who is kind of hacking on hardware and, little, kind of the hacker type, and then he discovers Bitcoin and starts getting into it. Who is it? Is it the young guys? Is it people in different countries? Like, who are these guys? Where do you see them coming from?
The first generation of miners probably fit that realm.
Like the Arduino hackers are just in there, and they're...
Yeah, there were a lot of hardware guys. There were a lot of guys that cut their prior past in putting together projects. There were a lot of crypto freaks and laissez-faire and perhaps chaos freaks that were against money. The people who came on board after Bitcoin reached $30 will blow your mind. Most of these people were between 16 and 20. It would be very rare to find somebody beyond the age of 25. They were extremely fanatical about what the future currency, a digitalized currency, would mean. And it's not because they had a historical perspective. It just made sense to them because that was the world they were bred in. These were people who were raised on computers. They were just coming aboard when the iPhone came out. So they're really, and some of them, the iPhone was already there and it was part of the background. And they were very, very, they had a lot of time. They had free energy because they were tapping their parents' electrical grid until some parents slammed their foot down. But it wasn't really that bad for a lot of them. They stayed on. And a lot of those people are starting all different sorts of businesses. Some of them are not tech businesses, by the way. They're, all different sort of hobby businesses that have expanded on. The later Bitcoin miners, the ones that came on after Bitcoin was above, say, $300 to $500, those individuals tend to fall more into the 25 to 45 range. They tend to be more the gentleman miner, if you will. They're people who would never reach out for a soldering gun. They would never really understand what a schematic is. And they really don't want to worry about thermal coefficients and things like that, which are very important when you're mining using this much energy. And they wanted to buy maybe a Cointerra miner, plug it in, and just make money in the background. And unfortunately, those people, the early ones did very well. The ones that came along even later, they probably will never make back their initial investment if they don't hold on to Bitcoin for a long time. Now, are the younger people still involved in Bitcoin? Absolutely, but it's not in Bitcoin per se. They're mining new coins, let's call them IPO coins that may or may not have a longevity past a couple of months. This is almost like the Cambrian explosion in evolution. There is so much development in these altcoins. And as far as I'm concerned, anybody who thinks that they know what is going to be the dominant coin species 20 years from now is just fully uninformed.
Yeah, probably it may not even be invented. We did do a great show with Brian on how to get into cryptocurrency mining, which I can include in the show notes, which was just, for me, even fascinating to learn all the intricacies.
Yeah, so to that world, so most of the people in that world, Bitcoin price fluctuations ultimately are not a big deal because what they're doing is they're mining other altcoins who may or may not be fluctuating exactly to the rhythm of Bitcoin. Sometimes these coins will increase in value by 3, 4, 5,000% in a week. And, a lot of people saying, well, that's, they're scam coins, they're pump and dump. From a miner's perspective, it's irrelevant. But here's the thing you need to understand about what I think is going to be a successful coin. A successful coin needs a market maker. The original market maker in Bitcoin, Litecoin, and all the Dogecoin, all the successful coins were miners first. The miners used their energy, their time, their talent, their money, their expertise. They built a market by accumulating these coins, and they found a ready market to buy these coins. Now, the perspective on whether they're dumping or unloading or they don't believe in the coin is open to question. I believe that a lot of miners ultimately believe in the premise of coins, but they don't have any secret telegraph to the future that says that this is the coin that will span all ages, other than we know Bitcoin will be around for quite a while. But the other altcoins, some of them will be gone, and some of them will sustain in their unique use cases. Some coins are tied to gold, some are tied to manure in India. I mean, there's all fertilizer. There's all sorts of types of markets out there. And if you mine those coins successfully, there'll be times that you mine a coin that will drop to a very small value. But on the aggregate, some of these coins wind up raising your potential by such an amount that you almost have to chuckle, because the world is busy, shedding tears over Bitcoin going down to $300, $200 or something like that. And some of these altcoins are exploding. Absolutely.
So can I buy a Bitcoin or a currency that's based on Indian manure? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. There was an altcoin, and I would have to research it here, but I haven't mined it in a while. What they basically did is they looked at the commoditization of manure.
God, I can't help but laugh on that.
Holy shit!
Oh man, trust Brian to bring something like this, ladies and gentlemen.
But let me tell you, that particular coin rose at one period 9,000%, and it's still doing quite well. It's well off its peak. But I knew a miner that was 100% dedicated. They threw almost 9 terahash towards this coin, which, by the way, at that particular moment, that was about 70% of the processing power of that coin. And they accumulated hundreds and hundreds of thousands. They sold them into the market and made essentially from that, again, how much money did they spend? Their energy and the use of that particular miner, maybe taken off a line from another reference coin like Bitcoin. So if we use Bitcoin as a reference point of what they could have made versus what they made on this manure coin, we're talking about a substantial amount of money. I'm thinking over $400,000 in a space of about 2.5, 3 weeks.
That seems crazy to me.
So let me ask you, how's Dogecoin doing?
It's not doing very well because Doge was originally its own mineable coin, and they had an identity crisis back in the summer, and the Litecoin community and the Dogecoin community got together and say, let's do dual mining. Let's mine these coins together, because they use exactly the same algorithm. When that happened, the two coins became attached at the hip. The value of Dogecoin was not going to aggress as high as before, but it wasn't going to go as low, because there was there's an elasticity connection to Litecoin's volatility. And Litecoin on its own hasn't done exceedingly well since the summer. And
no, Litecoin took a beating, because if you look at the current price of, let's say, example, $300 on the Bitcoin, that's about 1/4 of what it was from its high. Litecoin is like $3 something, and it went as high as what, $28, $29,
Yeah, but that was also at the time. Litecoin was silver to Bitcoin's gold at one time, and there was a very clear linkage between the two coins. That started to fall apart just about the time the merged mining took place, and it's never recovered. Instead of being $30 to like say $700 on Bitcoin, it's more like it went down to like $10 to a $500 amount to Bitcoin ratio. And I think it was an experiment that ultimately failed. It devalued both currencies.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it really made them less useful and less desirable from a miner's perspective. And again, without miners making markets in these coins, there would be no coin. It literally is the miner is the first buyer and seller of the coins. And if it's a really dynamic coin and it's a very interesting space, the miners continue to build more and more inventory, and they build a higher and higher market. And on some coins, that has lasted a very, very long time. There's dark coin, black. I mean, there's coins out there that are doing exceedingly well. Now, are they being used for transactions per se?
No way, right?
No, because they can tangentially You could use say a dark coin to buy Bitcoin. And the arbitrage between the two coins is where some people are making a tremendous amount of money. So this is outside the mining community. This is in the arbitrage community. The smart arbitrage players are doing nothing with Bitcoin versus US dollar or Bitcoin versus Litecoin. They're arbitraging the value of alternative IPO coins to peg coins like Litecoin and Bitcoin, and maybe even between two IPO coins. That market is extremely, extremely active. And about a year or so from now, well, probably about this time next year, we'll be talking about some multimillionaires that came from that particular element outside of the mining community. The mining community is a lot more quiet and reserved. The arbitrage community, there's a lot more, let's say, bragging going on. That's why you don't hear very much from miners. I mean, literally, I talk about it and people are like, oh, miners exist? Especially even people in the Silicon Valley, venture capitalists who've invested multi-million-dollar investments in Bitcoin. When you start talking about the mining operations and how that's working, they scratch their head. Is that still going on? Yeah, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do a Bitcoin transaction.
But a lot of the miners have moved offshore, China, India, Thailand, Vietnam, where the energy costs are subsidized and are much lower.
Yeah, the energy is a particularly large problem when it comes to direct Bitcoin mining. It's literally an arms race. How fast can you get your ASICs, and how cold can you get them because they're going to burn up, and how cheap can you get your energy? Those are your three variables. And then, of course, you're worrying about Bitcoin not going so low that your cost to recoup will never be arriving. Because, again, Mike mentioned this in pre-show, you don't lose money until you sell any item. And there's a perception amongst the new generation of miners that they're now losing money, that they're never going to recoup their investment. Well, yeah, Bitcoin stays at 225 or something. Their mining operations right now are probably completely underwater. But if Bitcoin moves, which I'm still an advocate that Bitcoin is going to be moving into 4 and perhaps 5 digits at some point, you would be very, very upset if you sold out at $200.
Yeah. So, Brian, what do you think of Big Gold, the company that has, or other similar startups where they, not necessarily startups, but companies that allow you to exchange or provide global access to gold through Bitcoin?
Well, I think Faisal has a great thesis on this. I'm gonna punt to him and then maybe put some background on it.
Well, it's nothing more than taking a gold contract, making it into a portable bearer instrument, one that can be traded. It couldn't be done previously because, how do you take a gold contract and how do you trade it? But now with the Bitcoin thing, you can, because you're essentially using the Bitcoin rails to transport the contract, show it in the ledger as to the ownership and so forth. But it's nothing more than a gold contract, which is allowed by law. You don't need any regulation. You can go to any, commodities dealer and precious metal dealer and get it. It could be backed. It could be a future contract. So very easy to sell, very easy to populate, very easy to use. The only from a regulatory aspect, a license is required. And the reason the license is required is because you're holding onto the funds. You're holding onto the funds, you're acting like a financial intermediary, and that's why you need a license. But otherwise, it's a pretty cool thing.
So is there any innovation here? Is this interesting per se? Companies like BitGold or other similar sort of companies?
Well, there are quite a few companies in this space who are trying to, get into it. How plausible it would be, I don't know. But the interesting part is that they're exploring all these so-called crypto ledgers, Ripple, Hyperledger, even Stellar, Ethereum when it comes out and so forth, and saying, well, how can we use these payment rails? How can we use these, payment technologies, new technologies, and take something as solid as gold and somehow, juxtapose the Bitcoin value onto it or the gold value onto it. Basically, you're spending gold, but the value that you're getting from gold is from the exchange. Mm-hmm. But the spend, the buy, the sell is absolutely similar to how you would spend and buy or sell or trade a Bitcoin.
Interesting.
So do you see a life cycle to this? I mean, obviously this is something that has the interest of some very veteran investors here, with George Soros's family being involved in one particular vehicle.
It's a solid commodity. I mean, first of all, bar none, it's something that is understood by many, many people. It is traded on many exchanges. You could buy, gold from 100 troy ounces from London and sell them in Australia and so forth. The markets exist 24/7. The arbitrage opportunities are there. What people are trying to do is say, listen, if we buy $100 worth of Bitcoins, we're just buying $100 worth of Bitcoins. The price can go up and down and volatility, etc. But if we buy $100 worth of gold today, and if someone can back it up with physical gold in some vault, that is most secure for me as an investment versus the Bitcoin. And that's the main difference. So I think there are people who will say, listen, if you want to do international trade, or you want to do high volume transfers, or if you want to, just open up a hedge fund or a mutual fund that basically speculates or keeps your currency in gold, this would be a very good vehicle for investment.
But you're not going to invest tomorrow.
No. No. I have been a gold trader way back in my earlier life. So I know. I mean, it's just a more, I guess, a newer and a better way of taking a gold contract and making it like a bearer instrument. One thing that can be channeled across everywhere. I mean, if I buy a gold instrument, 100 ounces of gold from the London Stock Exchange or Chicago Mercantile Exchange, what have you, and I say, Brian, I want to buy a burger, or Mike, I want to buy a pair of Nike shoes. How would you accept it? You can't. But if I juxtaposition that gold value onto a Bitcoin that I can give to you, or on a debit card or a credit card that rides the rail of the traditional POS network, but eventually goes to my gold vault and changes get you $100 to you in your fiat currency, fantastic opportunity, right? Doesn't matter if the price of Bitcoin is going up or down like crazy, because it doesn't matter. I'm using the price of gold. I'm not.
So Faisal, before the show, we talked about sort of gold trading, and you said that the price of gold now is lower than it was X number of years ago, I think 15 or so. That means that all the people who are just trading gold, would you argue that they are adding no value to the economy, or how does that sort of play into?
So yeah, gold in itself, gold is gold. It will always remain that for regardless how many years come may be. The minute you pair any precious commodity, non-precious commodity, anything with another currency pair, then you're trading. Then the price will fluctuate. So US dollar to the British pound, US dollar to pork bellies, US dollar towards wheat, US dollar towards a barrel of oil, gold, Bitcoin,
Indian manure. Yep.
Yeah, Indian manure, there you go. So whenever you put a pair, a trading pair, the price is now determined by the market, the supply, demand, et cetera, and so forth. But gold by itself, it's gold. Just like Brian said, people who mine coins are not losing anything until they sell. Because the minute they sell, they're now associating the value of the coin with the currency pair, which is the US dollar.
Exactly. And, and just to let you know, the coin that's attached to fertilizer is actually URO, or Euro coin. And it is currently one of the top 5 growth coins in the charts today. It's number 50 on the great chart, if you will, at crypto or coin market cap. And it has seen rises of over 4,000%. But another coin, for example, Paycoin, people have never heard of Paycoin. Today, it's the number 2 most traded coin. It is a 55.84% growth. Today, the volume was $787,000. And again, that's very light volume, but it's not anything to sneeze at. The market cap is $57 million. I've known miners that have got into something like Paycoin, which has been trending down with Bitcoin. But at one time, when you could get maybe 30 or 40 coins a block, they were able to walk away with what would have been maybe $50 in Bitcoin. and maybe in Paycoin maybe $600 or $700. So it's a tremendous return on investment. Paycoin is actually doing quite well as far as a currency, but it doesn't garner any press. It's mostly nerd culture that's using it. But
hey, that's where it kicks up. I like on their website
787,000.
The people's money, good for you, bad for banks. Do you think that that's inevitably true? Like, are banks the end losers in all of this? When things become more efficient, banks are just the inevitable inefficiency that get kicked out of the system?
No. But banks will always be there because they're a creation of politics and laws. Banks will not even closely resemble what we know of them today, 25 to 50 years from now. And it's a great selling feature of a lot of these altcoins to come up with sort of an anti-establishment, anti-banking scenario. Again, remember, for example, in payments, everybody forgets that the ugly side of payments is credit cards and credit card debt collection. And that as long as you have somebody who is willing to grant credit based upon your good name and prior history, there's going to be a bank involved in creating that underwriting environment. And you want it that way because you don't want to see your kid or your grandma or your wacky aunt lose everything because there wasn't a law or infrastructure to protect them. So as much as I like this idea that we're going to eliminate quote unquote banks, what we're going to eliminate is a lot of the inefficiencies, a lot of the bureaucracy, and a lot of the technological backwardness that we would see within the financial world. And yeah, there are certain elements of banking that are just going to become zero fee. Certain forms of, Faisal will talk probably quite eloquently for hours about how we're going to be moving money around the world in remittances that will definitely cut out the normal banking institutions. And quasi banks.
Brian, I do want to ask you this. We had a good little teaser before the show, and with Faisal as well. I'm particularly interested in the immigration of technologists to the U.S. and sort of the, I think, pivotal point we're at now. Do you think that this may be related to cryptocurrency, maybe not? But in terms of the overall immigration sort of climate now, it's getting into the U.S., it's a lottery system. Do you think this is changing, or do you think these are some of the future inhibitors of us just U.S. continuing to be a powerhouse in technology? Could this be the thing that, if done incorrectly, with regulation, just starts to push really, really smart people out of the U.S. or, doesn't allow them in? What are your thoughts there? Do you think we're on the far edge? Do you think we almost have it correct as far as immigration laws go?
Well, we're all, you and myself are all products of immigration to this country. The indigenous people here are the original landlords, and we took their land from them. Whether we had an ordained right to do it or not, it is a fact that we are visitors from Europe. We're now part of a country called the United States of America. My immigrant great grandparents, Irish, German, and Italian, they were treated like like dogs. The Italians were greasy wops. The Irish were drunk micks, and the Germans were smelly krauts. And they couldn't get decent jobs when they came here. They were leaving their European homes to start a new life in a place that conceptually was America. And the Statue of Liberty presented to them an image of a country where royalty, prior position, and nobility really had no place. And they abandoned their ancestral language. They embraced who they were. But my grandmother, who came from Italy, my great-grandmother especially, she refused to teach me Italian. My grandmother did and my mom did. She said, "You are an American. I am an American. And this is why I'm here. Don't ever forget the privilege of being in this country." And where they grew up in Newark, it was a mixing pot of every culture. there was all sorts of people, and everybody there had one idea in mind: to build and create a country where opportunity was boundless, and it didn't matter where you came from or what your ancestral culture was like. That's the America that I hope that we hold on to moving forward with whatever quote unquote immigration change we have. The America that we've had for the last 20 years is that we don't hyphenate anymore. That, my grandmother would actually, well, we do hyphenate, but in a different way. My grandmother would say, I'm an American and I was born in Italy, my great grandmother. And, my grandparents on the other side who come from Irish and German origin had the same feeling. It's not like they sat together and had a meeting. This is what they thought. Some of the cultural changes we're seeing in America today is based upon, speak your own language, write your own, in your own manner, keep all of your culture, everything. The problem with that is that balkanizes our country, and it long term does not bode well for what our founding fathers put forth and what the waves of immigrants up until the last 20, 30 years have believed in.
So assuming it's correct, right? I mean, I think we're
Sure.
both saying you need it, but the question is to what extent and how should it be operated? Should it be a lottery system for 10,000 people or 50,000 that doesn't change? I think that's the inherently recognized flaw in the system, is that as the number of people continue to grow, the immigration number and lottery system never changed. And there's a lot of incredibly smart engineers that just can't get into the U.S. to work.
Mike, my forefathers came through Ellis Island, and they had some simple questions. Do you have a disease? If you got a disease, we don't want you here. Period. Sorry. Is that discrimination? I don't know. Do you have some place to go? Do you have some place to? Is there somebody in this country where you're going to go? Essentially, a sponsor. And if that person didn't produce themselves, you're going back. You're going back. And you were provisional here. You had to prove your worth as becoming an American citizen. Now it's sort of like a joke, that, perhaps none of us really care about history anymore, right? But the history that a recent immigrant had to learn about our country was quite deep and quite profound. And it wasn't because we were making that a barrier to entry. We were letting them understand this is why we formed this country. It's not like your country. Your country isn't like our country. And that's not an arrogance. That's a reality. Because whatever country you're coming from, there was nobility, there was royalty, there were class systems, there were cultural systems. America was written on the backs of people who came with nothing and built something out of it. It was a pioneer spirit. That should not stop. What is missing in this narrative about, quote unquote immigration is, we need tech workers. Yeah, well, fine. You need a guy to sit at a computer in your office. He can't sit at a computer anywhere in the world. Oh, well, we need it so that America is strong. Hold it. Is America strong if you're going to bring somebody into this country who believes that all they are is a visitor into this country to make some money and then to go back to their country, either philosophically or emotionally or mentally? Now, this is not politically correct to talk about today because we've devised this sensitivity that everybody's culture must be insular. Yes, respect your culture. I'm proud of my roots. I'm proud that probably Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great's blood flowed through my body because they conquered all through Europe. The reality is America is built on a premise of you want to build this great idea and you want to perpetuate it forward. And every time I hear in the Silicon Valley to TV to out here in Southern California, Mexico and South America struggles, right in one of my hometowns, they were blocking buses of young immigrant children coming in. And what's missing is why should people come to this country? Well, it's so that they have a job. That's not what people came to this country for since its inception. They came here for opportunity. And those are two different things. And they also came here for the ability to build a new way of living where freedom and liberty is much more important than the class system that they were locked out of, or all the other things that would bind them down. And the people who came here against their own will, if you ask them about immigration, they have a slightly different take on this. This is a very complex issue. It's tied to emotions. But the bottom line is, if you're going to come to the country, become an American. I'm an American.
Okay, Faisal, so what is your thoughts on immigration? I mean, coming from a whole different part of the world, especially in Pakistan, I think there's an interesting perspective we always like to get from you, especially when it comes to what it looks like from the outside in the U.S.
The general perception is that anyone from a developing a third world country wants to move to a developed first world country. That's there. Like Brian really put it on the mark. If you're going to move there, you have to adapt. You have to adapt to that country's culture, norms, rules, laws, what have you. You cannot expect to juxtapose your culture or your cultural upbringing over here and expect that, the country is going to change for you. No, you have to change for the country. Just like Kennedy said, ask not what you can do for your country. What was it? Ask not what you can do for your country, but not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think it's the same. So I think it's the same thing. It's if you're going to move there as a temporary worker, then then you're just a temporary worker. But if you're going to move there with the intent to stay, then there are, I think, the laws, the norms, the prerequisites are pretty clearly laid out. That the path to citizenship means exactly that: citizenship, renouncing your previous country's citizenship, taking the new one, taking the oath, the allegiance and all that stuff. But you have to adapt. You must blend in. You cannot stand out just because you're different or what have you. The opportunities will come only if you accept the U.S. as is, which is
How big does it stand out from other places? Are people saying I really want to move to England?
So Europe has a faster track. U.S. has probably the longest track to citizenship. Canada is Canada's a huge country, but very little people. Same thing with Australia. So a lot of people are actually moving to either Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the U.S., and then Europe. Europe has one issue, which is language. Barring the U.K., you have to excel in the language. If you're going to go to the Netherlands, you need to know Dutch. And they have an equivalency exam that you must pass before you can get citizenship. Same thing happens in Italy, same thing happens in France, same thing happens in the Nordic countries. You have to ace their language. And that is a huge hurdle for people in the late 30s or 40s or 50s who are immigrating there. They can't pick up French and be fluent in it in 5 years. They will not get their passport until they actually pass the equivalency exam in French.
Faisal, when it comes to the U.S., my great-grandparents, for example, two of them did not know any words in English at all. And when they came to the U.S., and they came in their 40s, they made it their mission to two of them came in their 40s. They made it their mission to absolutely not only understand and speak English fluently, to read it, and to make sure that their children only speak that language. That, they had knowledge of the old language. It wasn't like they were renouncing their roots. And a lot of people today read this the wrong way. It was the immense amount of pride that they had into building something that we call the United States or America. And so they went about doing it. My great-grandfather, for example, he had a tough time with his German. He had a tough time, but he worked so well. He was able to get his accent down to almost a minimum in less than 7 years. And my grandpa was absolutely floored because every night he would listen to the radio and he would repeat every single word that they would say in English on the radio. And that's how he taught himself to speak English. And it wasn't, again, embarrassment. It was out of pride. It was out of duty to this new country that they're a part of. So we got to put a dividing line between this immigration.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Are people coming here to work? If they're a work visa, that's a different thing. And we need to define that and redefine it and put it together. But we have to ask ourselves as a society, if we build a great work environment for people outside this country, why in the heck are they not wanting to stay here and build something grand? If this country created this opportunity in the Silicon Valley, for example, why wouldn't they want to stay here and make it better? What as a country have we done to not make it so damn attractive for them to be here? So that's a bigger question.
I think the factors are many. I think one of the factors is taxation and so forth. A lot of people coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Nepal, their taxation is nowhere near what the American taxation is. I'm
not a big supporter of a lot of versions of taxation, but let me say this: to build a country that creates the opportunity where you want to fly 7,000 miles to do a job to send back to your family, ask yourself what within that society created that opportunity. What was it?
Taxation. Of course. No. Let me tell you the flip side. The flip side is U.S. is perhaps the cheapest country as far as taxation is concerned. Go to Canada. Go to the Nordic countries. Go to France. Go to Australia. You go to Indonesia. You'll find out what taxation is all about. It's a lot. I mean, Canada is almost like 50%. 50%. I have my friend, he says, I asked him, what you're doing? He says, working for the government. I said, really? You've got a job? He said, no, dude, I'm just kidding. It's before July. So almost six months I work for the government. 6 months I work for myself.
Yeah.
So, in the Nordic countries, it's even higher. It's like 58%, So I want to say one thing. This is a podcast about money and payments, and money obviously is all about. I think we sort of tend to forget it is all about behavior. Behavior changes, and one of the things is that if you're going to work in the U.S., it is about a behavioral change, the changing of your mindset. That is absolutely critical. We do have in the U.S. the work visa, which is the H-1B, which is 7 years, and it has a path towards citizenship for people whose employer will sponsor them for a green card, et cetera, and so forth. Many take it, many don't, et cetera. But that's a different debate. But I feel that people who come here to work do get a taste, and those who do decide then make the conscientious decision that they will integrate into America the way it is expected of all the people, on a societal fabric who are called Americans.
Yeah, very true.
I fully agree, and I think that's where this narrative really needs to be defined, because I talk to a lot of people in the startup world, and they're very binary about this. 100% mostly for open immigration, open borders, and I'm like, do you understand what an open border means? Do you understand that if you in fact have a 100% open border and there's no definition from anybody's country, that you are in fact losing your country? Well, that's not fair. Their country, their culture is just as valuable. The problem is you're subjugating your own culture to the cultures of these other countries by having a border that is 100% open. So there's the immigration here to have a work visa. The question about that is, questions have to be asked much more clear and get outside of the political correctness. Why are you taking this job here? Are you just going to, come here for 5 to 8 years, make millions of dollars, and then live like a king in your country? Fine. Define that to begin with as a way to become a citizen. And if that's the case, here's what we want our country to be. Here's our history, and make that much more integrated to the point where I think we're not even touching upon it in current citizen. Some people say citizenship is, a little too easy or a little too hard or whatever. I think a lot of the things that are being focused upon are the wrong things. If you're coming to this country and you're going to be, say, an entrepreneur, you should really, really understand what this means. What are you doing in creating this wealth in this country? If you're coming to this country to be an employee, then that's a different experience. And I think that is going to be a different track. And it's never going to be one size fit all. And by the way, that's not what it was when Ellis Island was active. There was a line of people who had no jobs and had no gumption to be an entrepreneur. They were just looking at moving bricks around a brickyard or laying railroad tracks. There was another line of people who were going to be self-made. They're coming here for the land grants. They're going to be a farmer. They're going to come out and go to the Midwest, and they're going to go to the areas that nobody wants to develop, and they're going to make something. That was the startup world in that epoch, in that era. And and a lot of the Irish, a lot of my forefathers came to America because they couldn't own land in the country. And they came to America because there was an advertising to produce value in that culture. That should not change. If you come to America and do that, yes, and then you become integrated in society, you didn't have to be told to speak English. You didn't have to be told to understand history. The people that were coming in that epoch, in that era, so loved this country and knew about it probably beforehand just by reading, that it was a no-brainer for them. I'm in fear that this new round of quote-unquote immigration reform is nothing like that. It's not about the land grants. It's not about this opportunity. It's not about the idealism. It's about, I want to make some money, and there are job openings, and these high-tech companies are not going to have their same valuation if they don't have immigrant labor forces. And I think we're creating a balkanization that ultimately will damage the tech sector in ways that are just unbelievable. Am I against immigration? No. Am I against visa reform? No. Do I want to close the borders? No. I want to open them up much wider, but in a rational way. You know, I'll tell you this. I live in Southern California. We would not have food in this country if it wasn't for illegal immigration. That's wrong. Those people should have to risk their life to come and pick our fruit and our nuts. You know, they should be able to come here like they did for most of our history.
It's very clear that Brian has a very positive outlook towards immigration reform.
I don't
You've
want
thought
it to
about
close
this one
down.
before, I can tell.
Yeah, I don't want it to close down because this country has given us so much wealth, and I don't want to shut the door. I want those people to come across here, but I also want them to understand what America, the ideal, is about, and not to lose hope of what that represents, even though currently and politically we may not be in a place where we were for 200 and odd years.
If you're still listening to this and you have any thoughts, do leave them on the comment section. We'd be more than interested to hear what you think, especially if you're going through
Brian
this.
would love to take your calls and answer them.
All right, guys. This has been a good one.
Wonderful show, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.